It started with the toaster. Not an affair, not a love note gone rogue, not even a suspicious late-night errand. Nope, just the toaster. That little stainless steel cube, a wedding gift from Diane's cousin, the one who once tried to sell us vitamins shaped like baby animals, finally gave out. One morning, it simply decided its tenure was over, ejected a pale, limp piece of bread with a defeated wheeze, and died with a dignity that most home appliances rarely get. Naturally, I took it as a sign from the universe. Not that my marriage was crumbling. No, I wasn't nearly that intuitive. I just figured it was time for a Costco run. Diane, meanwhile, had moved on emotionally and possibly geographically to somewhere I hadn't yet charted. But back then I just chalked her detachment up to seasonal gloom, or taxes, or the way the neighbors' floodlights illuminated our bedroom like a crime scene. We'd been married 7 years, lived in a perfectly square house in a perfectly polite cul-de-sac in Indiana, surrounded by identical fences and men who wore khakis to grill. Diane liked puzzles and quietly judging strangers. I liked Diane, which, in hindsight, might have been my first mistake. Anyway, back to the toaster. I made a joke about it that morning, something truly award-winning like, guess it couldn't handle our gluten dependency. And Diane responded with the kind of tight-lipped smile reserved for waiters who mess up your order, but you're too Midwestern to say anything. Then she folded her arms, leaned against the counter, and told me she might repaint the bathroom a deeper neutral. A sentence so aggressively bland, it should have been a red flag right then and there. Instead, I nodded like a man who knew the difference between taupe and grayish. Life was like that with Diane. Polite, efficient, the emotional equivalent of standing in line at the DMV and being told you're missing one form. Something always just off. But things truly veered left the day I got dragged into her world of themed dinner parties. Diane had started helping organize them for this local historical preservation society. You'd think that'd mean boring lectures on bricks and window frames, but no. They had costumes, charades, brie, and not just any themed parties. These were weirdly specific. 1920s tax evasion gala. Victorian morning with a splash of jazz. My personal favorite, roaring into recession. I went to exactly 2 before I ran out of polite ways to say no, and Diane stopped inviting me altogether. At the time, I thought she'd spared me. Now I think she was building a stage where the rest of the act could unfold. The revelation didn't come in a tearful confession or in an overheard phone call, because let's be honest, no one under 70 uses a phone for actual talking anymore. No, my grand awakening happened in the frozen food aisle of Kroger. I was minding my business, contemplating the existential weight of choosing between chicken pot pie and lasagna, when I heard someone call out, "You must be Diane's brother." I turned to find a woman, maybe late 50s, decked out in aggressively floral attire and holding a bag of peas like it was a winning lottery ticket. "Excuse me," I asked, because that's what you say when a stranger reassigns your marital role in a grocery store. "Oh, don't be modest," she giggled. "You were hilarious during the jazz and gin night. That hat. Honestly, I thought you were doing a bit." Diane said you two were just keeping it casual, didn't want to make it weird with the age difference and all. Now, I'm no Sherlock Holmes, but when a woman you've been married to for nearly a decade starts referring to you as her brother, something has gone deliciously wrong. I stood there, blinking behind my cart like an abandoned mannequin, while she rambled on about Paul's brilliant martini skit. Paul. Of course his name was Paul. Has there ever been an innocent Paul in the history of midlife crises? Naturally, I played along. Nodded. Smiled. Said, "Oh, you know Diane, always keeping things exciting." Then I bought my frozen lasagna, paid in exact change, and drove home in total silence, because nothing screams betrayal like cold marinara and a half tank of gas. The next few days were a whirlwind of cheerful denial. I started noticing the signs I'd missed. The way Diane always smelled like other people's fabric softener. The extra wine glasses in the dishwasher. The perfectly folded throw blanket on the couch, as if someone had actually used it, and then carefully tidied up like they'd been trained in covert military domestic operations. I considered asking her directly, but that felt far too rational. Instead, I opted for the more mature route. I signed up for the next themed party. This one was called Retro Romance, and it promised an evening of 80s love ballads, fondue, and classic courtship rituals, which, from what I gathered, involved a lot of shoulder pads and unspoken resentment. I showed up wearing a salmon pink windbreaker I found in a clearance bin, slapped a fake name tag on my chest, Trevor, software sales, and waited. Paul was easy to spot. He had that overconfident face men get when they think someone else's wife is their reward for memorizing wine pairings. He looked like he ironed his jeans. Diane stood beside him, laughing in that breathy way she used to reserve for me when I accidentally hit myself with a power drill. They didn't notice me at first. Why would they? I'd become a ghost in my own story. But when Diane finally did glance over and lock eyes with me, something flickered. Not guilt, not shock, just a momentary pause, like when you see someone you kind of recognize at the post office and can't quite place how you know them. I raised my cup of artificially pink punch and toasted from across the room. She looked away. After that night, I didn't confront her. I didn't pack a suitcase or key Paul's car or dramatically toss a wine glass into a fireplace. I simply started sleeping in the guest room and labeled the cereal boxes with passive-aggressive post-its. Her. Why does the Raisin brand say, for people who keep secrets? Me. Just trying out a new labeling system. In truth, I didn't need an apology or an explanation. I already knew. Diane had traded me in for a community theater production of romance. A man with better cheekbones and an apparent fondness for ironic suspenders. And me? I got the toaster. Well, the broken one. Still haven't replaced it. But sometimes, when the morning light hits the kitchen just right and the silence settles like dust over old promises, I look at that cold, useless appliance and think, at least it knew when to give up. It's surprising how many things you start doing just to kill time when you live with someone you're fairly sure is lying to you, but you haven't quite figured out how to catch them yet. I started reading the instruction manuals to appliances. I labeled everything in the garage with a level of intensity that suggested I was planning to open a hardware-themed escape room. I even reorganized the spice rack alphabetically, which I'd always believed was a hobby reserved for sociopaths and retired pharmacists. And it was during one of those long, pointless evenings of fake normalcy that I stumbled on the thing that broke the illusion. Not a dramatic email, not a mysterious text, and certainly not a diary entry labeled Top 10 Reasons I'm Cheating. No, Diane wasn't that sloppy. It was a newsletter. Yep, a cheerful, color-printed, locally stapled newsletter, the Willow Heights Gazette. Sent out monthly, printed on that glossy paper that makes your fingers feel like they've been dipped in olive oil. It had been stuffed into our mailbox next to a coupon for gutter cleaning and one of those ominous-looking envelopes that pretend to be jury duty. Normally, I'd chuck it straight into the recycling bin with the kind of precision you only develop after being married long enough to separate junk mail by font. But this time, the cover headline caught my eye. Willow Heights Historical Players Shine in Spring Showcase. Now, I wouldn't say I knew the Willow Heights historical players. I knew of them the way I know of mayonnaise-based salad competitions or adult coloring book clubs. They existed. They gathered. They weren't for me. Diane, on the other hand, had recently taken a more than casual interest in the group. She said it was for creative energy, which I translated as structured, adult-approved escapism that includes costumes. So, purely out of academic interest, I opened it. The second page had photos, poorly framed ones. Most looked like they were taken with a 2007 flip phone. But there they were, members of the historical players, mid-performance, in some kind of mock courtroom scene. Diane stood right in the middle of the stage, wearing what I can only describe as a colonial pantsuit hybrid, like Betsy Ross got recruited into the CIA. And right beside her, grinning like a man who'd been told he could finally talk about Civil War muskets in public, was Paul. Now, again, I wouldn't say I'm a suspicious person. I once trusted a neighbor named Chuck to watch our house while we were on vacation, only to return to discover he'd hosted a poker night in our living room using our Wi-Fi and drank the last can of LaCroix I had hidden behind the pickles. But I let it slide. So when I saw Diane and Paul, not just standing close, but performing what was described in the caption as a reenactment of Judge Stonewall's scandalous sentencing, something clicked. Curiosity is a powerful drug when you're emotionally understimulated and suspicious of your spouse. I checked the website listed at the bottom of the page. Apparently, the historical players had a member portal. I'd never been prouder to be a tech support guy than I was in the moment I bypassed their weak CAPTCHA and created an account using a fake name, Ruben Glass, aspiring thespian and Baroque enthusiast. Inside the portal, they had a whole calendar of events, uploaded skits, member notes, and, my personal favorite, open comment threads under each performance recap. Most of it was innocuous. Comments like, great enunciation, Carol, and, next time let's bring our own cheese platter. That sort of small-town sparkle that makes you want to throw your computer out the window. But then I found it. Under a post labeled Stonewall and the Socialites, behind the scenes was a video. I clicked play. There they were. Diane and Paul. Not in character. Not on stage. Just behind the curtain, mid-rehearsal. Diane was laughing too loudly at something Paul had said, and he was fixing her collar in a way that would have made a tailor uncomfortable. It wasn't overt, and if you were someone who believed in the purity of community theater, you'd probably see nothing wrong with it. But I've seen that laugh before. It's the one Diane used to do when I'd get flustered trying to hang Christmas lights while halfway up a ladder. That was her, you're a moron, but you're my moron laugh. This was different. This was, I'd take off this colonial vest for you in under 5 seconds laughter. I paused the video and stared at the screen for a long while, half expecting the browser window to spontaneously explain itself. It didn't. Instead, Diane walked into the room with her usual gentle suspicion, the one she wore when I did something uncharacteristically domestic. "What are you doing?" she asked, eyeing my screen like I might be learning how to dismantle a satellite. "Just looking into community theater," I said, without turning. "Thinking about getting into character work. Maybe something tragic. Maybe something ironic." She blinked. "Since when do you care about theater?" "Since they started holding auditions in our marriage," I said, then closed the laptop. Diane didn't ask anything else. She just stood there for a second too long, then said she needed to go return some books to the library. At that point, I wasn't sure if she meant actual books or if library was code for Paul's weirdly polished condo. I watched her walk out. Then I reopened the laptop. Not for more clues. No, I was done gathering evidence. This wasn't CSI, Suburbia. Instead, I went to the member roster and created a new profile, Ruben Glass 2, performance critic. Then I started leaving comments. Paul's delivery was a little wooden. Lacked commitment. Diane should rethink her projection. It doesn't carry well beyond betrayal. Great costumes. Shame about the chemistry. Feels dishonest. I left those comments, closed the tab, and leaned back in my chair. No confrontation. No melodramatic monologue in the kitchen. Just quiet participation in the theater of the absurd Diane had built. I figured I'd let the next act play out however it wanted. And I kept the newsletter. Not as evidence, but because it finally gave me something interesting to read while waiting for the toaster I still hadn't replaced. Diane came home the next evening wearing a sweater she'd pretended to hate 2 months ago. That alone should have raised a few eyebrows. It was the blue one with sleeves too long for utility, but not long enough for style. The one she once said made her look like she gave up halfway through grad school and opened a candle shop. She walked in with that same casual energy reserved for library returns and stepping over puddles. I stayed on the couch, remote in hand, flipping channels without watching any of them, performing what I've come to call domestic background acting. "You're quiet," she said, tossing her purse on the kitchen counter like she'd just returned from a United Nations summit. "Did something happen?" I looked at the remote like it was going to answer for me. "Just thinking about trying out for your little theater club," I said. "Thought I could play the disillusioned husband. You know, stretch my range." Diane paused long enough to confirm she was rehearsing her next sentence. "You're still on that?" "Still." I turned around slowly. "Oh, is it a phase now? Like kombucha or the Peloton?" She poured herself a glass of water, like hydration would help dodge the conversation. "Tyler, I told you already. It's just something I do for fun." "Yes," I nodded. Theatrical reenactments of people's deeply buried trust issues. Loads of fun. She didn't answer, which meant she either didn't have a lie prepared or was trying to figure out if I was bluffing. I decided to help her along. "I joined your website," I said, pointing toward the laptop still sitting open on the kitchen table. "The community portal. Big hit, by the way. I'm thinking of contributing a short play. Working title, My Spouse, the method actor who forgot which life was real." Her expression twitched just slightly. Not panic, not guilt, just the beginning of that distant, vague look people get when they've misplaced something but can't remember if it was important. "You don't understand what it's like," she said finally, and I swear I could hear the cliché forming behind her teeth. "I need it. Please don't say something for myself." I waved my hand. "I know all the lines. You needed space. You needed freedom. You needed a new emotional support hobby with a side of secret neck massages. I get it. Diane exhaled sharply. Not quite a sigh, more like an audible attempt at self-control. You've been distant for months, she said, which was news to me. Distant? I raised an eyebrow. Is that what we're calling 5 a.m. rehearsals now? Because I've been pretty geographically consistent. Kitchen, living room, sometimes garage. Meanwhile, you've been emotionally ziplining through colonial America. I'm trying to be honest with you, she said, like it was a brand new hobby she'd just picked up. I leaned back. Honest. Diane, you told a woman at Kroger that I was your brother. She winced. Finally, something. I panicked. She was nosy. It was easier that way. You're aware that lying is not the standard approach to dealing with nosy grocery strangers. I didn't want her asking questions. Oh, right, of course. Wouldn't want to damage your stellar reputation in the frozen aisle network. You think they'd revoke your brie privileges? There was a long pause then, the kind that fills a room when both people have said enough to know exactly what the other one means without having to clarify. Diane shifted her weight to the other foot like that was going to give her a better angle on denying everything. You think this is easy for me? She asked. You're clearly struggling, I deadpanned. Must be exhausting, balancing deception and monologues. Did Paul help you rehearse that line too? She glared, which would have been more effective if she wasn't holding a glass shaped like a mason jar with a pineapple print on it. It's hard to take someone seriously when they look like they're about to host a brunch-themed podcast. Nothing happened with Paul, she said, but her voice dipped slightly at the end, like even it was tired of being involved in the cover-up. Nothing, I asked. So you're telling me you just, what, formed a spiritual pact with a man who adjusts your costume in every behind-the-scenes video like he's prepping you for televised confession? You're being ridiculous. No, Diane. Ridiculous is you dragging me to your roaring into recession party dressed as a 1930s insurance fraud victim while you and Paul recreated the entire Federal Reserve meeting in interpretive dance. Her jaw dropped a little. That was satire. Yeah? So is this marriage. We stood in silence after that. She had nothing else to throw out, not even a weak attempt at gaslighting, which I found a little disappointing. I had already lined up a dozen sarcastic comebacks I didn't get to use. A real waste of creative effort. Finally, she said, so what now? Now? I asked. Now we get brutally practical. You love performance? Great. This is the third act. The audience is awake. The lights are on. But we're not pretending anymore. You're making this into a spectacle. Oh, sweetheart, I said, you made it a spectacle. I'm just finally acknowledging I bought a front row seat. She didn't respond. Just took her pineapple jar and walked to the bedroom. I didn't follow. I was done chasing. I sat down and started filling out a note on my phone. List of things I should have noticed sooner. So far it had 6 bullet points, including started drinking tea for the vibe. Practiced English accents when she thought I wasn't home. Got weirdly defensive about the definition of scene partner. Sudden fascination with muslin fabric. Had a contact named Wig Storage in her phone. Referred to me as Ty, to people who actually know I hate that. The door creaked down the hall. A drawer opened. One closed. Whatever. Let her pack. Or don't. At this point, even the logistics were starting to feel like improv. I opened the community forum one last time. The next performance was scheduled for the weekend. Dress code. Post-war domestic conflict. I figured they already had the roles filled. After all, Paul was a seasoned player. Diane, a seasoned liar. But I was tempted to RSVP anyway, just to see if their version of reality came with stage directions. You know a marriage has gone off the rails when your plans start to include phrases like logistical pettiness and calendar-based retaliation. I wasn't interested in dramatic exits or poetic justice. I wanted efficiency, organization, a spreadsheet of consequences. That Friday, Diane had her usual play practice at the community center. This meant she'd be gone from 6 p.m. to 9 p.m., allegedly learning how to convincingly faint as a war widow. I knew she wasn't coming back smelling like heartbreak and monologues. More like Paul's off-brand cologne and self-importance. And that was fine. Really, I had work to do. I started with the utilities. After a quick call to the electric company, the account was officially under Diane's name. Same with gas, water, internet, trash pickup. It's amazing how cooperative people get when you say, I'm transferring it all to my spouse. She's the one staying. I'll be moving out soon. Technically true. Eventually. Someday. Probably not today. Next, I gathered every mildly valuable or sentimentally annoying thing she'd ever insisted we buy together and labeled it Diane's. Not with masking tape. That would be too friendly. I printed full-sized paper signs in 48-point font. The yoga ball. The matching end tables. The ceramic bowl she said was ironically minimalist. I even labeled the decorative ladder she never let anyone climb. All of it. Tagged like evidence in a crime that hadn't quite been prosecuted yet. Then came the piece de resistance, the guest bedroom. I converted it into a pop-up museum, the exhibit of conveniently forgotten promises. Each display included items I found particularly illustrative. The personalized vow booklet she'd once made using a calligraphy kit she never used again. The dream vacation folder she abandoned in a drawer after declaring the Caribbean had too many touristy colors. Even the memory jar from our second anniversary, containing little slips of paper with messages like, "Let's never lie to each other," and "You're my best friend." I placed them under glass bowls and stuck index cards next to each, museum style. Artifact A2, The Concept of Honesty, 2016 to 2023. Currently out of circulation. Diane returned home a little after 9:30 p.m. late, again. Of course. She walked in carrying her coat, like she'd been carrying emotional weight all evening, and spotted the signs immediately. "What is this?" she asked, gesturing at the newly labeled ottoman like it had betrayed her. "Oh, good. You noticed," I said from the living room. "I've begun the preliminary stages of asset curation. That's the Diane collection. Limited time exhibit." She looked around, eyes bouncing from label to label, confusion escalating like she'd just been handed an IKEA manual written in Latin. "You're being ridiculous." I prefer the term methodical. It's more on-brand for a man whose wife moonlights in civic reenactments while simultaneously recasting her personal life. "I told you, nothing's happening with Paul. Right? That's why I transferred the gas bill to you. So you can warm your performances with the heat of fictional innocence." She opened her mouth, closed it, then tried again. "So what? You're just going to label my things? That's your grand plan?" "No," I replied, standing up and stretching like I'd just won something. That was step one. Step two was the email. You see, Diane had started a group chat months ago with her theater friends, the Stage Squad. Because apparently grown adults who reenact historical divorce hearings in costume like to coordinate carpool with emojis and excessive punctuation. What Diane didn't know was that she'd once invited me to a rehearsal dinner using that same group thread. I still had access. So I wrote the following message and scheduled it for 7 a.m. the next day. Subject: A new role opens up. "Hello, Stage Squad. This is Tyler, Diane's brother. Some of you might remember me from the Kroger casting. Just wanted to say thanks for letting me observe the show behind the scenes these past few months. Your performances, especially the ones that didn't require costumes, have been enlightening. P.S. Diane, you left your script. It was under How to Pretend This Is Fine. Break a leg. Tyler." I set the email to auto-send, closed my laptop, and looked at Diane. She still stood frozen in the entryway, arms crossed, but not in the defiant way. In the "is this actually happening" way. "This is childish," she said. "Childish would have been tagging your potted plants with deceptive foliage." I was tempted, but I'm above that. "You're enjoying this." "I am," I nodded. "In the way someone enjoys folding laundry after finding a sock that isn't theirs. It's not about happiness. It's about clarity." She looked toward the guest room. "That's my stuff, too. You can't just—" "Oh, don't worry. You're keeping everything. The bills, the props, the tragically themed Pinterest board. All of it. You get the stage. I'm taking the lights." She didn't respond. Just walked past me into the bedroom. The door clicked closed behind her. I sat back down and reopened my spreadsheet, adding a final tab titled Pending Conversations. Only one item on the list so far. Tell Diane we're doing separate taxes this year. She can deduct Paul as a performance expense. Diane didn't speak to me the entire weekend after the exhibit. She'd retreat into the bedroom, close the door like she was preserving energy for her next dress rehearsal in denial, and only emerge to refill her water bottle and pretend not to see the museum labels still hanging around the living room like party decorations nobody had cleaned up. I didn't remove any of them. I considered adding new ones, but I figured restraint was the classier option. Besides, I had a better idea. Monday came around, and I decided it was time. Not for an argument or another passive-aggressive interpretive art installation. This time, it was going to be the talk. The real one. No stage. No costumes. No audience. She was at the kitchen table, thumbing through her tablet, pretending to read a news article titled, 10 Simple Ways to Reconnect with Yourself. I didn't interrupt. I let her finish discovering herself through a bullet point list before I pulled out a chair and sat across from her. We need to talk, I said, in the most unsentimental voice I could manage. She glanced up. About what? About how this ends. You know, the actual logistics of it. The part where we stop pretending this is still some version of working. She set her tablet down. So that's it. You're just giving up. No, Diane, I said. You already did. I'm just catching up. Her jaw tightened slightly. I could tell she wanted to fight it. Maybe trot out some emotional counterclaim. Maybe accuse me of not trying hard enough. An impressive charge coming from someone who lied to a grocery clerk about our entire relationship. I know you've been seeing him, I said. We don't need to play fool. At this point, even the houseplants know. I'm not. Diane, I interrupted. We've already passed the stage where denial is cute. We're in the post-credit scene now. She looked down at her hands like they might offer a script. When they didn't, she leaned back and crossed her arms. You used to be different, she said. So did you, I replied. Back when your hobbies didn't include fictional courtships and dodging accountability. She rolled her eyes. People change. Exactly, I said. Which is why this version of us doesn't make sense anymore. That's when she tried the nostalgia angle. We've been together for 10 years, Tyler. Almost 8, I corrected. But I'm glad you added the inflation. Really boosts the resume. She pressed her lips together like she wanted to say something wise, but accidentally bit into sarcasm instead. I waited. I didn't mean for this to happen, she finally muttered. Sure you did, I said. You just didn't plan for the aftermath. You thought I'd be too checked out to notice, or too passive to care. I was lonely, and I was in the house. Every day, talking to you, living with you, folding laundry you abandoned halfway through because it was emotionally draining. But sure, let's blame the lack of theater in our love life. She looked away again. Diane had this habit of looking to her left when she was trying to summon sympathy. I don't know if she learned it from YouTube or a director, but it always made her seem like she was waiting for a cue. I'm not in love with him, she said quietly. That's great, I said. But the damage isn't about love. It's about trust. You can lose that faster than affection. And once it's gone, even liking someone becomes hard work. She stood up and paced to the window, her classic move when cornered by reality. What are you saying, Tyler? I'm saying we stop pretending we're going to fix this, I answered. We draw up a separation plan. We figure out who takes what, and we end it before this becomes even more of a farce than it already is. So you just want to throw everything away? No, I said. I want to put it somewhere it belongs. Preferably not in the recycling bin of your next monologue. She turned around sharply. That's too tough. No, I said calmly. It's honest. Which, if you recall, used to be a shared value. She didn't answer that. Just stared at me like she was doing mental math and didn't like the sum she was getting. I don't have a plan, she finally admitted. You never did, I replied. You just improvised with confidence. She sat down again, softer now, less combative, more resigned. So what do you want me to do? I want you to stop looking at me like I'm the one tearing this down, I said. Then I want you to tell me how we're splitting the house. Or if we're selling it. I'm flexible. I just want clean lines. She nodded slowly. I don't want to fight you. Great, I said. Then don't. We sat in silence for a minute, the kind that actually made sense. The kind that didn't feel heavy or dramatic, just practical. Like the universe had finally shut up so we could think straight. Do you think we'll ever talk again after this? She asked. Maybe, I said. Depends on whether you start a new group chat for post-divorce reenactments. She smiled for half a second. A tired one. Like someone who remembered being funny but hadn't used the muscle in a while. I wasn't trying to hurt you, she said. You just didn't care if you did, I replied. She didn't argue. That night, I packed a few essentials, just the basics. Laptop, charger, the clothes I actually liked that hadn't been accidentally shrunk in one of her laundry experiments. I left the exhibit intact. Let her decide if she wanted to take it down or keep it as a cautionary tale. Before I left, I wrote a note and left it on the kitchen table. Thanks for the memories. And the acting lessons. Tyler. The first thing I noticed after moving out was how quiet life gets when no one's rehearsing betrayal in the next room. No theatrical sighs from behind a door, no weird vocal warm-ups floating down the hallway. The absence of Diane's dramatic breathing exercises was oddly peaceful, like the apartment itself had taken a deep breath and decided to chill. I rented a small two-bedroom place above a nail salon run by a woman named Edna, who greeted everyone like they owed her money, and she still liked them anyway. It had slanted ceilings and furniture that looked like it had been collected exclusively from the under $50 section of the internet. But it was mine, and the Wi-Fi worked, which, frankly, is the baseline of modern sanity. Diane emailed me 3 times that first week. The first one was 2 paragraphs long and included the phrase, "if we're being fair," which was already a strong enough warning to ignore it. The second one was a list of houseplants she believed were technically hers, along with timestamps of when she purchased them, which I appreciated for its absurd level of pettiness. The third one simply read, "Are you doing okay?" I didn't respond to any of them, not out of malice, but because there's only so many times you can rewrite a message that starts with "it's rich that you're asking now," before deciding silence is the more dignified option. The rest of the divorce process went about as smoothly as 2 people who pretend not to be bitter can manage. We split the house profits evenly. She kept the SUV because it was, and I quote, "better for hauling costumes." I took the old sedan and left her a passive-aggressive sticky note on the steering wheel that said, "Congratulations, you've won the Utility Vehicle Performance Award." I also kept the toaster. Not because I cared about the appliance itself, but because I liked the reminder. The little dead rectangle that marked the beginning of the end deserved a spot in my new kitchen. Diane hadn't touched it in months anyway. She always claimed she was cutting back on carbs, which I now know is code for saving room for deceit. A few weeks after the paperwork was finalized, mutual friends started crawling out of the woodwork with messages that all said basically the same thing in different fonts. Wow, I had no idea. That must have been so hard. And she always seemed so happy. My personal favorite was from a guy named Todd, who once asked me if Belgium was part of France and then emailed to say, "Bro, if you ever want to talk, I'm here." I didn't respond to Todd either, mostly because I didn't feel like revisiting high school geography or my marriage at the same time. At one point, I ran into Paul at the copy center. He was standing in line with a folder labeled Script Ideas, Workshop. I resisted the urge to ask if it included a scene about taking responsibility for terrible decisions. He saw me, nodded politely, and said, "Hey man." Like we were teammates on a bowling league instead of 2 men linked by an awkwardly miscast role in someone else's drama. I nodded back because I'm not a barbarian, and also because public confrontations in front of a laminator aren't really my brand. As for Diane, the updates came sporadically, mostly through shared acquaintances who hadn't figured out which side to be subtle about yet. I heard she stayed in the house for a bit, then moved in with her friend Valerie, then possibly started seeing someone new. This time a dentist, which is at least an upgrade in practicality. I hope he flosses. In terms of how I felt about everything, the truth is, underwhelmed. I think people expect this sort of thing to end in catharsis or vengeance, or at least a night of deeply questionable decisions involving karaoke and whiskey. But for me, it was more like closing a bad browser tab. I wasn't angry anymore. I was just done scrolling. I started going to a community woodworking class on Thursdays. Not because I was chasing some therapeutic metaphor or reclaiming masculinity through splinters, but because I wanted a new coffee table and IKEA gave me a tension headache. The instructor, Carl, had no emotional awareness whatsoever and gave advice like, "You just gotta sand it until it looks less terrible," which felt surprisingly transferable to life. I also started dating again. Slowly, awkwardly, with the enthusiasm of a man who once trusted someone who thought civic reenactment was a relationship solution. My first date was with a woman named Nina who worked in accounting and laughed exactly once in 90 minutes. I counted. My second date was better, mainly because it didn't end with someone showing me pictures of their cat's birthday party. But the best part of post-Diane life wasn't the dating, or the woodworking, or even the personal freedom. It was the fact that everything I did was mine again. The choices, the mistakes, the playlists. Nobody was around to mock my laundry system or re-edit my grocery list. Nobody corrected my pronunciation of quinoa. Life was quieter, simpler, and, surprisingly, kind of funny in ways I hadn't noticed before. The last time I spoke to Diane was accidental. I was at the library, returning a book I pretended to finish, when she walked in wearing sunglasses indoors like she was protecting herself from reality. We made eye contact, she gave a tight smile, and I nodded once, just enough to say, we were a thing, and now we're not, and both of us are still upright. It was the most honest exchange we'd had in a long time. I walked out without saying anything else. I didn't need to. The curtain had already dropped, and I wasn't sticking around for the blooper reel. Tyler, former husband, occasional furniture builder, recovering co-star in someone else's drama. And that's the story. No applause necessary. Thanks for watching. Rate the story in the comments. Subscribe to the channel